It began with a whisper in the deep, a ghost on a sonar screen where no ghosts should be. For decades, Flathead Lake, Montana, had held its secrets close. Carved by ancient glaciers, it is the largest natural freshwater lake by surface area west of the Mississippi River, a vast sapphire expanse cradled by the Mission and Salish mountains. Its waters are deep, cold, and clear, known for trout fishing, summer sailing, and the persistent local legend of its own monster. But in the autumn of 2023, a survey team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, testing a new generation of deep-water imaging sonar, found a monster of a different kind. It was an anomaly, a shape so geometrically perfect, so utterly out of place on the glacially-scoured lakebed 300 feet down, that the technicians first dismissed it as a glitch. A long cylindrical shadow, nearly 300 feet from end to end, with a distinct raised structure amidships. It wasn't a rock formation. It wasn't a sunken arch. It looked, impossibly, like a submarine. Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead archaeologist on the expedition, a man whose career was built on debunking maritime myths, not discovering them, felt a prickle of disbelief. A submarine in a landlocked mountain lake, thousands of miles from the nearest ocean? It was preposterous. The Great Lakes had their share of World War II-era training wrecks, but Montana? The logistics were impossible. There were no locks, no seaways connecting this place to the Pacific. He ordered a second and third pass. The image sharpened, dissolving into the unmistakable profile of a mid-20th century naval vessel, a Gatto-class or Below-class submarine, a relic of the Second World War. The immediate questions were staggering. What was it? How did it get here? And what happened to its crew? The discovery was immediately classified, the area cordoned off by the U.S. Navy, and a quiet, intense investigation began. For Eris Thorne, it became more than a professional curiosity. His own grandfather, a Navy man, had been lost at sea during the war. His submarine, the USS Cygnus, vanishing without a trace somewhere in the Pacific in 1944. A coincidence, he told himself? The ocean was a big place, and many boats were lost. But as the remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, descended into the frigid darkness of Flathead Lake, transmitting the first haunting images of the wreck, a single detail made Aris's blood run cold. There, on the conning tower, encrusted with decades of freshwater sediment, but still faintly visible, was the vessel's nameplate, Cygnus. The story of the USS Cygnus was not in any official history book. It was a footnote in a censored file, a ghost in the National Archives. To understand how it ended up entombed in a mountain lake, one must go back to the desperate, ingenious, and terrifying days of 1943. Part 1. The Whisper of Project Chimera. The Second World War was a cauldron of innovation, a desperate race where science and engineering were as crucial as bullets and steel. While the Manhattan Project was secretly splitting the atom in the deserts of New Mexico, other less famous but equally audacious projects were underway. One of the most secret was born from a simple, terrifying reality: the German U-boat menace. The wolf packs were strangling the Allied supply lines in the Atlantic, and in the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Navy's mastery of torpedo warfare made every Allied vessel a potential target. The U.S. Navy knew it needed a quantum leap, a way to make its submarines not just quieter, but truly invisible. Not to the human eye, but to the electronic senses that were now the new gods of naval warfare: sonar, sound navigation and ranging, and the nascent technology of magnetic anomaly detectors, MAD, used by patrol aircraft. The answer came from a man who lived in a world of theoretical physics and esoteric mathematics, Dr. Elias Vance. A Jewish refugee who had fled Austria in 1938, Vance was a quiet, unassuming professor at Caltech whose mind worked on a different plane. He wasn't a naval architect. He was a specialist in electromagnetic field theory and acoustic wave propagation. He proposed something that sounded like science fiction. He believed it was possible to create an acoustic and magnetic bubble around a submarine. His theory was twofold. First, by using a series of piezoelectric transducers embedded in the outer hull, controlled by a complex wave generator, the submarine could emit a countersignature, a precise anti-noise that would actively cancel out the sound of its own engines and propeller cavitation. It wouldn't just be quiet, it would create a cone of silence, making it a ghost to enemy hydrophones. This was the acoustic component. The second part was far more radical. Vance theorized that by generating an incredibly powerful low-frequency electromagnetic field around the hull, the submarine could distort the Earth's magnetic field in its immediate vicinity. To an airborne MAD sensor, the massive steel anomaly of the submarine would simply cease to exist, blended into the background magnetic noise of the planet. The project was deemed too radical by the Navy's Bureau of Ships, but it caught the attention of a powerful figure in the Office of Naval Research, Admiral Harold Bowen. He saw the potential. In an era before nuclear deterrence, the submarine was the ultimate stealth weapon, and making it truly invisible was a war-winning proposition. The project was given the highest classification, codenamed Project Chimera, after the mythical creature of disparate parts. It was moved from the theoretical world of Caltech to a purpose-built, clandestine facility hidden on the Oregon coast near the mouth of the Columbia River. Naval Research Detachment 17, it was officially called. To the few who worked there, it was called the Phantom Yard. Here, a newly commissioned below-class submarine, hull number 394, was chosen as the testbed. It was christened the USS Cygnus. The name was Vance's suggestion. Cygnus, the swan constellation, a silent traveler in the vast ocean of the night sky. The command of the Cygnus was given to one of the Navy's most promising young officers, Commander Marcus Thorne, Eris Thorne's grandfather. Marcus was a submariner's submariner, cool under pressure, technically brilliant, and fiercely protective of his crew. He was skeptical of Vance's academic wizardry, but he was a patriot and a soldier. If this device, which the engineers were calling the Shroud, could save American lives and sink enemy ships, he would see it through. Throughout late 1943 and early 1944, the Cygnus underwent a radical transformation. Its outer hull was stripped and refitted with Vance's crystalline transducers. Its interior was crammed with massive capacitors, wave generators, and miles of thick copper cabling, all powered by a dedicated diesel generator that served a significant portion of the aft torpedo room. The energy requirements were immense. When the Shroud was active, it would drain the boat's batteries in a matter of hours, making it a tactical, not a strategic system. The crew was hand-picked. Each man was a veteran, chosen for his skill, his discretion, and his psychological stability. They were told they were testing a new type of degaussing system. Only Commander Thorne and his executive officer knew the true, audacious scope of Project Chimera.
The initial sea trials were astonishing. In controlled tests off the Oregon coast, the Cygnus, with the acoustic component of the Shroud active, repeatedly slipped past the U.S. Navy's best destroyer escorts, vanishing from their sonar screens as if it had dissolved into the water. The magnetic system was trickier. The first time they activated the powerful EM field, it knocked out every electrical system on the boat, blew every fuse, and magnetized every wrench and fork on board. Vance and his team worked feverishly, refining the system, creating shielding, and learning to modulate the field. By September 1944, they believed they had solved the critical problems. The Shroud worked. The Cygnus could become a phantom at will. The time had come for its final deep-water operational test before it would be deployed to the Pacific Theater. The plan was simple. The Cygnus would depart from its secret base, travel 200 miles west into the deep waters of the Pacific, and conduct a series of full-power system tests. It was to maintain radio silence, but report its position via a coded low-frequency sonar pulse every 6 hours. It was accompanied by a single escort vessel, the destroyer USS Abercrombie, which would stay 20 miles distant, monitoring the Cygnus's acoustic and magnetic signatures, or lack thereof. On the morning of October 12, 1944, under a gray, drizzling Oregon sky, the USS Cygnus slipped its moorings and headed for the open sea. Commander Marcus Thorne stood on the conning tower watching the coastline recede. Dr. Vance was not on board. His work was done. But his last words to Thorne echoed in the commander's mind. "We are tampering with forces we barely comprehend, Commander. Treat the shroud with respect and with caution." The first two check-ins came like clockwork. The Abercrombie sonar operators listened in awe as the massive submarine simply faded from their screens when the shroud was activated. The third check-in, scheduled for 1800 hours, was missed. Then the fourth. By midnight, there was only silence. The Abercrombie raced to the Cygnus's last known position. They found nothing. No oil slick, no debris, no wreckage. The USS Cygnus and its 80-man crew had vanished from the face of the Earth. A massive secret search was conducted. For weeks, ships and planes scoured thousands of square miles of the Pacific. They found nothing. The official investigation concluded that the submarine had likely suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure and plunged to a depth far below its crush limit, imploding without a trace. The experimental technology, it was speculated, must have had a fatal, unforeseen flaw. Project Chimera was immediately shut down. Its records were classified, sealed, and buried in the deepest vaults of naval intelligence. The families of the crew of the Cygnus, including Marcus Thorne's young wife and his son, Eris's father, were told what all such families were told. Their loved ones were lost at sea on active duty, presumed killed. The war moved on. The secret was kept. For 79 years, the ocean, it was assumed, held the final resting place of the Phantom submarine, until it was found in a place the ocean could never reach. Part 2. The Tomb in the Mountains. The ROV footage from the bottom of Flathead Lake was mesmerizing and terrifying. The USS Cygnus sat perfectly upright on the lakebed, its sleek black hull remarkably preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor freshwater. There was no sign of battle damage, no crumpled steel to indicate a catastrophic implosion. It looked as though it had simply been placed there, a museum piece in the dark. For Eris, Jojatan's Damon Shan, watching the live feed in the cramped control room of the research vessel Sentinel, it was like seeing a ghost from his own family's history. This was his grandfather's boat, the tomb of a man he had never known. The professional archaeologist in him was overwhelmed by the personal connection. The Navy's recovery and investigation team, led by a no-nonsense Rear Admiral named Jensen, took full control. Eris, due to his expertise and his unique connection to the wreck, was kept on as a civilian consultant, a decision that granted him a front-row seat to one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history. The first question was access. The hatches were sealed tight. Divers, operating in the crushing pressure and near freezing temperatures at 300 feet, managed to manually open the main cargo hatch. The interior of the submarine was not flooded. The pressure differential was immense, and the equalization process took hours. When the ROVs finally entered, what they found was a time capsule from 1944, preserved in chilling perfection. Papers were still scattered on desks in the control room. A half-finished game of chess sat on a table in the crew's mess. Racks of uniforms hung undisturbed, but there were no human remains. The submarine was empty. This discovery only deepened the mystery. An 80-man crew couldn't simply vanish from a sealed submarine. As the exploration continued, they found the ship's logs in the captain's quarters, sealed in a waterproof container. The final entries were written in Commander Marcus Thorne's neat, precise handwriting. The logs detailed the initial success of the test. The shroud was performing beyond their wildest expectations. Thorne wrote with a kind of professional awe about how his submarine could simply disappear from the world. Then the entries changed. The final entry, dated 1800 hours, October 12, 1944, was frantic, and parts were barely legible. 1755, full power test of EM field initiated. Readings are off the charts. Vance's calculations were conservative. The entire hull is humming, a deep vibration I can feel in my teeth. The lights are flickering. The compass is spinning uselessly. 1758, an electrical smell like ozone. A low, keening sound is coming from the shroud's capacitors. It's not a mechanical noise. It's something else. The sea outside the periscope is shimmering. It's not water. It looks like heat haze. But we're in the cold Pacific. 1800 hours. Blinding white light outside. Every electrical system has just shorted. We're running on emergency batteries. The boat is being shaken violently. Not like we're in a storm. It's a vibration, a resonance. It feels like the whole world is a tuning fork, and we've been struck. 1802. The shaking has stopped. We are dead in the water. No power except for these emergency lights. The depth gauge is non-functional. The gyroscope is frozen. Outside, there is only absolute blackness. No bioluminescence, nothing. My sonar operator is reporting nothing. Not the seafloor, not the surface, not the Abercrombie, just silence. An absolute profound silence he says he has never heard before. It is as if we have been lifted out of the ocean entirely. 1805. We are trapped. Wherever we are, it is not the Pacific Ocean. The air pressure is stable. The hull is intact. But we are somewhere else. God help us. That was the last entry. This log entry was the Rosetta Stone of the Cygnus incident. It suggested something far stranger than a simple mechanical failure. The team began to look not at naval engineering, but at theoretical physics. They brought in consultants, including a brilliant astrophysicist from MIT named Dr. Evelyn Reed. Reed, after studying the declassified schematics of the shroud and Commander Thorne's final log entry, proposed a theory so outlandish it was initially dismissed by the naval brass. She argued that Elias Vance, in his quest to bend the magnetic field, had inadvertently done something else. He had created a device that at peak power didn't just warp the local magnetic field, it warped the fabric of space-time itself. Her hypothesis was that the intense, focused energy of the shroud had created a short-lived, unstable wormhole, an Einstein-Rosen bridge. The blinding white light, the vibration, the sense of being lifted out, these were descriptions of a vessel passing through a traumatic spatial transition. The USS Cygnus hadn't sunk in the Pacific. It had been instantaneously and violently teleported across the continent. But to where? And why a lake in Montana? The answer to that question was not found in physics, but in geology. Eris Thorne, poring over geological surveys of the region, found a connection. The area around Flathead Lake was the site of the ancient glacial Lake Missoula. At the end of the last ice age, some 15,000 years ago, this enormous lake, holding more water than Lake Erie and Lake Ontario combined, was held back by a massive ice dam. When the dam broke, it unleashed a cataclysmic flood that scoured the landscape of eastern Washington and flowed down the Columbia River Gorge, the very same river system where the Cygnus began its final journey. Geologists had also long known about a massive, deep aquifer system that runs beneath the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, a subterranean network of water-filled caverns and tunnels carved out over millennia. Dr. Reed and Eris Thorne combined their disciplines to form an astonishing hypothesis. On October 12, 1944, the shroud didn't just create a wormhole. It created a one-way portal with a random exit point. That exit point, by a chance of 1 in a billion, happened to be deep within the Earth's crust, in one of the largest caverns of the subterranean aquifer system, directly beneath what would one day be Montana. The Cygnus was instantaneously teleported from the Pacific Ocean into a pitch-black, water-filled cavern miles underground. Its systems were fried. Its crew was trapped in absolute darkness, with no way of knowing where they were. They were no longer in the ocean. They were in the planet's plumbing. Over the subsequent decades, the submarine, now a silent tomb, was slowly moved by the deep, gentle currents of the aquifer, eventually coming to rest in the deepest part of the system, the bedrock directly beneath Flathead Lake. A minor seismic event, or simply the slow process of erosion, eventually caused the floor of the lake to subside, and the ancient cavern became part of the lake itself. The submarine, after an 80-year journey through the dark, had finally been delivered to a place where it could be found. It explained everything: the impossible location, the lack of wreckage in the Pacific, the pristine condition of the submarine, and the most haunting mystery of all: the missing crew. The investigators, armed with this new theory, returned to the submarine. They scanned the interior not for bodies, but for clues about what happened after the final log entry. They found them in the forward torpedo room. Scratched into the steel bulkhead, evidently carved with the knife in the dim emergency lighting, were names, dates, and messages. It was a makeshift memorial and a final testament. The crew of the USS Cygnus had survived the teleportation. They had been alive, trapped in total darkness, 1,000 miles from home, deep inside the earth. The log scratched on the wall told a story of discipline and despair. They had rations and air for a time. They took stock, tried to repair the systems and maintain military order in the face of an impossible situation. They had no idea where they were, only that they were trapped. Days turned into weeks. The last date scratched on the wall was 2 months after their disappearance. The final message was simple and heartbreaking. Tell our families we love them, for God and country. CDR, M. Thorne. They had not vanished. They had waited and hoped, and ultimately perished in the dark, their tomb a state-of-the-art war machine that had carried them to a place beyond the edge of any map. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when a dive team explored the area around the submarine on the lakebed. About 50 yards from the bow, they found what looked like a collapsed section of the lake floor, the entrance to a now sealed underwater cavern, the exit point. The story of the USS Cygnus was finally complete. The U.S. government, faced with a story that would rewrite chapters of physics and history, chose to declassify the entire event. The tale of Project Chimera and of Elias Vance's brilliant and terrible invention, and of the impossible journey of the Phantom submarine, became a global sensation. The submarine itself was deemed too historically significant and too difficult to move. It was declared a National Historic Landmark and a protected war grave, destined to remain forever in the deep, silent waters of Flathead Lake. A memorial was erected on the shore, bearing the names of the 80 men of its crew. For Eris Thorne, the discovery was the end of a lifelong journey. He had found his grandfather. He had brought his story, and the story of his heroic crew, out of the darkness and into the light. He often stood at the memorial, looking out over the placid blue waters of the lake, thinking of the steel ghost resting in the depths below. He thought of the courage of men who faced not an enemy they could fight, but a reality they could not comprehend. The world remembers the USS Cygnus as the submarine that teleported, but Eris Thorne remembered it as a tomb, a testament to a secret war, and the final silent resting place of his grandfather, a man who, in the pursuit of making his vessel invisible, had sailed it clear off the edge of the world. The mountains had kept their secret well. The year that followed the declassification of the USS Cygnus affair was one of upheaval, not of armies and borders, but of philosophy and physics. The world had been given proof that its most fundamental laws of distance and time were not immutable. Humanity, it turned out, had accidentally kicked open a door to the impossible in 1944, and for nearly 80 years no one had known the door was even there. For Dr. Eris Thorne, life became a whirlwind of lectures, advisory panels, and quiet, heavy conversations with men in dark suits. He was no longer just a marine archaeologist. He was the custodian of a miracle and a tragedy. He had honored his grandfather, but in doing so, he had handed the 21st century a new set of terrifying tools. He found himself spending more and more time in a place he never expected, the Nevada desert, deep beneath the scrubland and Joshua trees, within a newly established black budget facility designated only as Promontory. Project Chimera had been reborn. It was a sterile, modern echo of the Phantom Yard in Oregon, all polished concrete, humming servers, and the oppressive silence of absolute secrecy. Here, the nation's brightest minds, led by a new generation of physicists and engineers, were trying to tame the ghost that Elias Vance had unleashed. They were rebuilding the shroud, not the crude, brute force device of the 1940s, crammed into a diesel submarine, but a refined, controlled, and infinitely more powerful version. Their goal was no longer invisibility, but translocation. Eris was there as a consultant, the project's living link to its past. He and Dr. Evelyn Reed, the astrophysicist whose theory had cracked the Cygnus case, were the project's reluctant conscience.
"You're chasing a whisper in a hurricane," Evelyn told the project director, a 4-star Air Force general named Decker, during one tense briefing. The Cygnus event wasn't a success. It was a catastrophe of cosmic luck. The energy calculations, the resonant frequencies, they were a chaotic, accidental alignment. You can't bottle that kind of lightning. What if the next time you open a door, it doesn't lead to a quiet cave in Montana? What if it leads to the heart of the sun, or to somewhere else? General Decker, a man forged in the pragmatism of modern warfare, was unmoved. Dr. Reed, the declassified Cygnus files were the most downloaded documents in the history of the internet. Our rivals are not asking, what if? They are asking, how soon? We can't put this genie back in the bottle. Our only choice is to learn how to command it. The new shroud was a massive toroidal ring of superconductors and exotic alloys suspended in a cavernous spherical chamber. The plan was to start small. The first test would involve an unmanned probe, designated Wanderer 1, a simple titanium sphere equipped with sensors and a beacon. They would attempt to translocate it a mere 100 meters from one side of the chamber to a heavily shielded receiving platform on the other. Eris stood in the observation deck, high above the chamber floor, watching the preparations. His grandfather's last, desperate log entry played over and over in his mind. Blinding white light, the whole world is a tuning fork. He felt a profound sense of dread, a feeling that they were all standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a step into a darkness far deeper than the one that had claimed the crew of the Cygnus. "All systems green," a calm voice announced over the intercom. "Initiating energy cascade in 5, 4, 3. Eris watched the ring. A faint blue haze, like St. Elmo's fire, began to dance along its surface. The low hum of the facility's power systems rose in pitch, becoming a piercing, resonant tone that vibrated through the thick plasteel window of the observation deck. 2, 1, mark. There was no explosion, no grand flash of light. For a split second, the Wanderer 1 probe sitting on its launch pedestal simply ceased to exist. In its place, the very air seemed to fold in on itself, shimmering like a desert mirage. A perfect silent sphere of distorted space, no bigger than a basketball, hung where the probe had been. On the other side of the room, on the receiving platform, the probe instantly appeared with a soft crackle of displaced air. A wave of relieved applause and cheers erupted in the control room. It had worked. Controlled, precise, instantaneous translocation. General Decker clapped a subordinate on the back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. But Eris and Evelyn weren't cheering. They were staring at the spot where the probe had vanished. The shimmering sphere of distorted space, the microportal, was still there. According to their models, it should have collapsed the instant the energy cascade ended. "The aperture is stable," a technician reported, his voice laced with confusion. "It's not closing." "Readings," Decker barked, his smile gone. "There's an energy signature coming from the aperture, General. It's not ours. It's passive, but it's complex." For 10 seconds, the control room was silent. The only sound, the frantic clicking of keyboards as scientists tried to understand the data scrolling across their screens. The shimmering sphere in the chamber began to pulse, its light shifting from a clear distortion to a deep, bruised purple. "Something's coming through," Evelyn whispered, her face pale. Eris felt the hair on his arm stand up. He thought of his grandfather's final report of the profound silence of a place that wasn't their world. They had assumed the portal closed behind the Cygnus. What if it hadn't? What if they had been knocking on a door that had been left slightly ajar for 80 years? The sphere of purple light suddenly expanded. It didn't explode. It unfurled like a black flower blooming in impossible dimensions. From its center, something emerged into the test chamber. It wasn't the Wanderer 1 probe. It was long, impossibly thin, and made of a material that seemed to drink the light, a blackness deeper than any shadow. It had no visible means of propulsion, yet it moved with a silent, deliberate grace. It was not a machine, nor did it look like any living thing. It was a shape, an idea of a shape, given form. It hung in the air for a moment, silent and utterly alien, before retracting back into the aperture as quickly as it had appeared. Then, with a sound like shattering glass that echoed in the mind, not the ears, the portal snapped shut. Silence returned to the chamber. The spot where the portal had been was empty. The Wanderer 1 probe sat on its receiving platform, a testament to a stunning success. But everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something else entirely. General Decker stared at the empty space, his face ashen. The race to control translocation was over before it had even begun. The question was no longer whether we could open the door. The question was what and who was now aware that they knew how to knock. The echo of the USS Cygnus's impossible journey had finally answered back, and humanity was no longer alone. The silence in the control room at Promontory lasted for exactly 4.7 seconds. Then it was shattered by General Decker's voice, a blade of command cutting through the shock. "Lockdown. Full facility lockdown now. Seal this chamber, nobody in or out. I want every byte of data from every sensor triple redundantly saved. Get me a direct, coded line to the Pentagon. And someone get a security detail on that probe. Treat it like it's radioactive." The room exploded into disciplined chaos. Red lights flashed, alarms blared, and armed soldiers in sterile white fatigues materialized in the hallways. Eris Thorne and Evelyn Reed were quickly, but politely, escorted from the observation deck to a windowless, soundproofed briefing room. For 2 hours, they sat in silence, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a bone-deep dread. They had a single shared thought.
The crew of the Cygnus were explorers who fell off the map. They had just sent a postcard from the edge. Finally, General Decker entered, his face a mask of grim control. He was followed by two haggard-looking data analysts. "All right," Decker began, foregoing any preamble as he threw a tablet on the steel table. "Tell me what we saw." Eris picked it up, her fingers flying across the screen. "We don't know," she said, her voice strained. "The analytics are paradoxical. The entity had a clear visual profile, but it registered no thermal signature. It was the exact temperature of the ambient air, down to 1,000th of a degree. It had mass, enough to register on microgravimeters, but it didn't seem to interact with light in a normal way. It wasn't reflecting it, it was nullifying it. The chemical composition analysis came back with a single result: undefined. It's like trying to analyze the chemical properties of a whole." "It gets stranger, General," one of the analysts added, pointing to a complex waveform on the screen. "In the 2.3 seconds the entity was present in our dimension, it emitted a single broadband pulse. It wasn't random noise. It's a structured signal, incredibly complex. We run it through every decryption model we have. SETI, military codes, everything. It's not a language, not as we understand it. It's more like a mathematical proof. A sequence of prime numbers and geometric progressions encoded in a phased neutrino burst." Decker stared at the screen. "A message?" "More like a receipt," Evelyn corrected softly. "A confirmation of delivery. It's saying, 'We received your package and here is our return address.' It saw our probe vanish and looked back through the peephole we opened. It knows where we are. It knows that we are." The weight of her words settled in the room. This was no longer a theoretical exercise. The bell had been rung, and they had no idea who or what was now coming to answer. "So what's our play?" Decker said, his gaze fixed on Eris. "You're the historian here, Dr. Dorn. You understand the origin of this. Is there anything in Vance's notes, in your grandfather's logs, that gives us a clue what we're dealing with?" Eris had been quiet, his mind racing, connecting the past to this terrifying present. "My grandfather's log described the event as a resonance, a vibration," he said slowly. "He said the world felt like a tuning fork that had been struck. Dr. Vance didn't just build a machine. He found a specific frequency, a key that fits a universal lock. We just use that same key." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "We've been focused on the portal, on the void between 2 points, but we're missing the most important artifact in this entire equation, the Cygnus itself." Decker and Evelyn both looked at him confused. "The sub is a tomb, a museum piece," Decker said. "No," Eris insisted. "It's the original receiver. It's the tuning fork that was struck 80 years ago. It spent months, maybe years, marinating in that other place, adrift in that aquifer. Its hull was subjected to energies we can't even begin to measure. What if it didn't just pass through? What if the steel itself was changed? What if it recorded something?" Evelyn's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. Resonance cascade, quantum entanglement. The whole could have become a passive antenna. The metallic structure could hold a residual energy signature, a memory of where it's been. "Exactly," Eris said, his voice gaining strength. "We've been focused on the portal, on the void between 2 points, but we're missing the most important artifact in this entire equation, the Cygnus itself." Decker and Evelyn both looked at him, confused. "The sub is a museum piece," Decker said. "No," Eris insisted. "It's the original receiver. It's the tuning fork that was struck 80 years ago. It spent months, maybe years, marinating in that other place, adrift in that aquifer. Its hull was subjected to energies we can't even begin to measure. What if it didn't just pass through? What if the steel itself was changed? What if it recorded something? Evelyn's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. Resonance cascade, quantum entanglement. The hull could have become a passive antenna. The metallic structure could hold a residual energy signature, a memory of where it's been. Exactly, Eris said, his voice gaining strength. We've been focused on the portal, on the void between 2 points, but we're missing the most important artifact in this entire equation, the Cygnus itself. Decker and Evelyn both looked at him confused. The sub is a museum piece, Decker said. No, Eris insisted. It's the original receiver. It's the tuning fork that was struck 80 years ago. It spent months, maybe years, marinating in that other place, adrift in that aquifer. Its hull was subjected to energies we can't even begin to measure. What if it didn't just pass through? What if the steel itself was changed? What if it recorded something? Increasing frequency to 7.83 hertz, muttered Evelyn. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency. If there's a signal, it might be hiding in the background noise. The moment she touched the control, it happened. It wasn't a sound or a light. It was a sudden, violent lurch in perception. Eris gasped, grabbing his head. The cockpit of the Triton flickered, not like a failing light, but like a failing idea. For an instant, he could see the steel walls of the submersible and simultaneously a landscape of impossible, shifting geometry. He heard Lieutenant Commander Evans cry out in alarm. "What is that?" Evan yelled, her hands tight on the controls. "All my nav systems are offline. I don't know what I'm getting." "It's the hull," Evelyn shouted, her face a mixture of terror and ecstatic discovery. "The scanner's resonance field is making the residual energy in the hull resonate. It's not giving us a reading, it's giving us a playback." The experience intensified. Eris felt a profound, crushing silence that was not the absence of sound, but a presence in itself. He saw colors that had no name, geometric patterns that folded in on themselves in defiance of Euclidean logic. There was a sense of immense, ancient consciousness all around them, not intelligence in the human sense, but something far older and deeper, a married into the very fabric of existence.
Hostile, not friendly, but simply there. It was like a microbe suddenly becoming aware of the vast, complex organism it inhabited. And through the chaos, Eris felt a sliver of something else, a flicker of human emotion, faint and distant, fear, confusion, resignation. It was the emotional echo of his grandfather's crew, a psychic stain left on the hull, preserved for 8 decades in the cold and the dark. They had felt this. They had seen this. "Shut it down," Eris choked out, the sensory overload becoming unbearable. "Evelyn, shut it down, now!" Evelyn, struggling against the same disorienting effect, slammed her hand down on a large red button. The hum ceased. The world snapped back into the familiar, solid reality of the Triton's cockpit. They were all panting, covered in a cold sweat. "What in God's name was that?" Evans whispered, running a diagnostic on her systems. "That," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with awe, "was the void. A direct sensory imprint of the space between spaces. The Cygnus didn't just travel through it, it soaked in it. The hull is a recording device." Before Aerith could process the magnitude of what they had just experienced, an alarm blared from Evelyn's console. "Wait," she said, staring at her screen. During the event, the data logs were flooded with gibberish, pure static, except for one channel.
She isolated a single, clean waveform from the chaos. It was a simple, repeating pulse, elegant and clear. She cross-referenced it with the data from the promontory event. A perfect match. "This is it," she breathed. "It's the carrier wave, the return address signal from the entity at promontory. It's embedded inside the memory of the void. It is not a message being sent to us. It's like a law of physics in that place, a constant." Eris looked from the screen to the dark shape of his grandfather's submarine outside the viewport. The truth was beginning to dawn on him, more terrifying and more wonderful than he could have imagined. The signal from the alien entity wasn't a threat. It wasn't a greeting. It was a key. It was the fundamental frequency of the void itself, and it had been hiding in the steel of the USS Cygnus all along, waiting for a machine with the right sensitivity to listen. They hadn't just found a way to decipher the message. They had found the operating frequency for the fabric of reality itself, and the quiet wreck at the bottom of a mountain lake was their Rosetta Stone. General Vance stood transfixed beneath the glowing, impossible geometry of the gateway model. His initial excitement had curdled into a cold, hard focus. He was not a man of science or philosophy. He was a man of strategic calculation. "A stable, warm hole," Vance repeated, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of command. "Dr. Reed, what are the power requirements to initiate this structure? The maximum aperture? Can we send a payload through?" Evelyn, still recovering from the shock of the revelation, scrambled to her console. "The data suggests the energy required is immense, General. We're not creating a wormhole, we're tuning one. It's like finding the resonant frequency of a pre-existing cosmic guitar string. The energy is needed to stabilize the constant's waveform and bridge the gap. We're talking gigajoules. We'd need to divert the output of a small nuclear plant. Safely contained, of course." Eris stepped between the general and Evelyn, gripping the tethered pages of his grandfather's logbook. "General, with all due respect, we need to talk about the destination. My grandfather scuttled the Cygnus because he realized this constant wasn't an escape route. It's an invitation. We've just proven that the entity, or whatever generated the promontory signal, is capable of creating a stable fold in space-time. This is a civilization vastly beyond our understanding. Sending a weapon or even a manned probe without understanding the environment is suicidal. It is exactly what Commander Thorne feared." Vance did not turn around. "With respect, Mr. Thorne, your grandfather made a tactical decision in 1944 based on a primitive understanding of the phenomena. I make tactical decisions in 2025 based on the reality of global power dynamics. If we can reach the source of this signal, any civilization that powerful is a threat until proven otherwise. And if we can't secure it, someone else will." He finally turned, his gaze sweeping over Eris, Evelyn, and the assembled security personnel. "The mission is now split into two concurrent objectives. Objective Alpha, Dr. Reed, you will focus on developing the power coupling and generating the constant for a stable 10-second window. Objective Beta, Mr. Thorne, you will use the logbook and the sensory data from the Triton dive to create a detailed environmental risk assessment of the destination. What is the atmospheric composition? What are the gravitational forces? What is the nature of the entity? We need to know what to send through and what it will encounter."
Part X. Ignition. Evelyn's team worked at a frantic pace, assembling the massive temporary energy apparatus. It involved an electromagnetic accelerator originally designed for orbital defense, repurposed to generate the immense power needed to stabilize the constant's waveform. The device, nicknamed the tuning fork, was placed in the center of the largest cavern in the vault. On the day of the test, the atmosphere in the underground complex was electric. General Vance and his full command staff were present, sealed behind a thick, lead-lined observation window. Eris and Evelyn, strapped into special neurological dampening harnesses to mitigate the effects of another cognitive event, stood at the primary control board. "Power coupling complete," Evelyn reported, her hands steady on the controls. "We are ready to initiate the waveform. Eris, run me through the sequence again. Initiate power flow, stabilize at 1.21 gigawatts. Generate the 11-dimensional constant via the tuning fork. Hold stability for 10 seconds. Deploy probe alpha on T+1. Terminate power at T+10. Understood. Evelyn took a deep breath. Command, we are initiating the sequence. Proceed, Doctor. Vance's voice crackled over the secure line. Evelyn threw the master switch. A deafening, rising whine filled the chamber, vibrating through the thick concrete. The air around the tuning fork shimmered, distorting light. On the main display, the complex prime number sequences of the Cygnus constant resolved into a pure, stable form. The power surged. Then, in the space before the tuning fork, it appeared. It wasn't a flash of light. It was a whole. It was a shimmering, rotating disk of absolute blackness, defined not by edges, but by the impossible way it consumed the light around it. It was the visual equivalent of an existential scream. Within the disk, the impossible, shifting geometries Eris remembered from the Triton dive, ribbed and folded, defying three-dimensional comprehension. The gateway was open. "We have stability," Evelyn yelled over the roar of the equipment. "Aperture at 3 feet, T+2 seconds. Deploy probe alpha," Vance's voice commanded. A robotic arm swung into position, holding the titanium cylinder of probe alpha, the one carrying the forbidden demonstrator weapon. The probe slid silently through the air toward the black disk. As it touched the edge of the gateway, the air around it crackled, and the probe did not disappear instantly. Instead, for a fraction of a second, the titanium liquefied and reformed into an incomprehensible, non-Euclidean shape before it finally vanished into the void. "Probe is through," Eris shouted. "Data feed initiated." On the observation screens, a new image flickered to life, transmitted directly from Probe Alpha's hardened camera. It was a dark, silent landscape defined by crystalline structures of immense size, bathed in a purple, pulsing light. The ground was not dirt or rock, but a material that seemed to breathe light. And then, in the distance, a structure, vast, ancient, and unmistakably artificial. It was built not with stone or steel, but with the same folding prime number geometry that defined the constant itself. It was the source, the home. Suddenly, a massive 11-dimensional surge of energy erupted from the gateway. It wasn't a discharge of power. It was a response. The entire chamber flared with an intense, blinding white light. "Energy spike! It's coming back!" Evelyn screamed, grappling with the controls. The gateway, instead of remaining a passive hole, began to expand, its dark void pulsating like a massive, hungry eye. The impossible geometry inside began to leak out, causing the concrete walls of the vault to visibly shudder. "Shut it down! Shut it down now!" Vance bellowed from the comms. Evelyn slammed the emergency kill switch, but it was too late. The system, overloaded by the retaliatory surge, failed to cut power instantly. The flow of energy was momentarily reversed. Eris watched in horror as the holographic model of the gateway was replaced by a live, terrifying reality. The crystalline structures of the void's landscape were now inches away from the vault's floor. Just as quickly as it had erupted, the power failed. The roar died. The light vanished. The gateway snapped shut with a violent final pop that threw Eris and Evelyn against the control panel. Silence. The chamber was dark, smoky, and still. The gateway was gone, leaving only scorch marks on the floor. The mission was over. "Report," Vance demanded, his voice shaky, a sound Eris had never heard from the general before. Evelyn, her face streaked with soot and sweat, pulled herself up. "Probe Alpha is gone. The constant destabilized. But General, on the final second of the broadcast, the entity sent us something back, a packet of data. It wasn't a message, General. It was a ping." She typed furiously, pulling the final data packet from the scorched memory banks. A single line of code appeared on the screen, a series of coordinates. "General Vance," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "They didn't just receive our probe. They took our coordinates. The ping, it's a direct trajectory solution. They know where we are." The stakes are now higher than ever. The entity knows Earth's location. The next part must deal with the immediate fallout, the geopolitical panic, and the necessity of reopening the Bingway to either communicate or prepare for defense. Would you like to continue with the General's military reaction and the scientific scramble to understand the entity's ping, or focus on Eris's personal ethical dilemma?